I think you can boil acting essentially down into one of two things, conflict or intimacy. And when it comes to conflict, we've been pretty good at protecting our actors. There's a fight coordinator, a stunt coordinator. I don't care if it's a push, a shove, a slap, fist fight, sword fight, gunfight. It doesn't matter. There's somebody there, a professional, to take you through those moments. You're going to do this, then you're going to do that, then you're going to do this. Are you okay? You work it out, you rehearse it. You're in coordination with the director, and everybody knows what to do. Intimacy, not so much. And for years, in a male-dominated art form, actors have been left to their own devices, often confronting embarrassment, confusion, exploitation, assault, because they don't know what to do. Oh yeah, just have fun, go at it, make it hot, with someone that you've known for maybe 10 minutes. So today, we're going to talk about the intimacy coordinator with my friend and colleague Carly Zine on why it's important and what you need to be able to do to set boundaries for yourself when it comes to professional, intimate work. Put the phone back in your pocket. Creating behavior starts now. Well, hello my fellow daydreamers. Intimacy. It's a big part of acting. And oftentimes it's not something that's physical. To be truly open-hearted, to be wide open and in personal contact, real contact with another human being is intimate. And that can be scary as hell. Any of you that have really trained seriously, certainly if you've been in my classroom, you know that that's vulnerable. And if you think about the relationships in your life, how many times are you really, truly open and vulnerable and present with someone? It's those real special relationships, those powerful connections that allow us, especially when we feel safe, where we feel we're not going to be hurt or taken advantage of, where we let our guard down, right? Well, the actor, you got to be able to walk on set, go into rehearsal, walk into an audition, and be vulnerable, be open, be present. And it's scary. And when it comes to physical intimacy, that's a whole nother ballgame. Now, I'm a 50-year-old white guy, right? So I've had a steep learning curve. And, I met Carly. How I met Carly, I was teaching a few years ago at my studio, and there was an altercation in a rehearsal. There was no teacher present, and there was some physical contact, pushing and shoving that was really beyond the bounds of what anyone felt safe with. And this was in front of classmates, and, it broke out into a real problem. It had to be separated, and, people were upset, and, students took sides, and there were different versions. There were 15 people in the room, and I literally 15 different versions of what was going on. But in a broader, more important context, people were really upset. And this was right in the beginning of the Me Too movement. And I realized, right, as the artistic director, as the owner of a business, a studio, that I needed to be much more mindful of how I set boundaries, how I make things safe. And it was a wake-up call, to be quite honest with you. And so I was like, I need to look into this, and found this term, intimacy coordinator. And so I reached out to Carly. I said, listen, I need somebody to come in here and talk to my students, educate me on how to approach this work. And it was eye-opening. And now you can go online, you can read about an intimacy coordinator. They're used all the time now. HBO was the first studio to guarantee intimacy coordinators on every set. The Deuce was the first one, but now, everybody has them. Netflix, Hulu, Stars, Amazon. And there's an organization, Intimacy Director and Coordinators. It was founded by Tanya Sinia and Alicia Rodas. But you look at some of this work that actors have to do. I mean, Jesus Christ. Talk about vulnerability. I mean, look at Normal People. I May Destroy You. Outlander. And you look at these physical scenes, you need somebody to help, to talk through things, to make sure everybody's safe. I mean, how many times have any of you felt really uncomfortable? I don't care if it's a slow dance, or maybe it's a hug or a kiss. How many times have you been in a scene where somebody shoves their tongue down your throat and you're like, what the fuck? But do you say something? No. Do you want to rock the boat? No. Do you want to be a problem? No. And so you let it happen, and it doesn't feel good. It's violating. God, he keeps grabbing my ass, and I don't like it in the scene. But am I going to be a problem? Do I want to get fired? They'll replace me. All of these things that keep actors from voicing their concerns. So it's important. And as you guys pursue your professional careers, those of you that are actually doing that now, those of you that are in school or about to, you need to be really crystal clear about what your rights are and what you can do in order to protect yourself. Now, Carly has got an interesting story. She got her MFA from Yale, so, she's coming out of one of the best and most revered training programs in the United States. She suffered a sexual assault in her first year in grad school. How that was handled, how the university dealt with it, how her classmates dealt with it, how she dealt with it, changed the course of her life. So we're going to talk today about those experiences, about what it's like to be in an intense rehearsal process in a show where, maybe you're lovers, you're married, it's a strong physical attraction. The lines can be blurred, feelings can be confusing. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference between fantasy and reality. So these intense feelings that happen to you can really cause a number on your life. How do you keep yourself grounded? How do you keep yourself centered so that you don't, fuck up the rest of your life because, you're falling in love with your co-star? It's a lot to navigate, I think. And, let's just get right to it, shall we? I started off with Carly just asking her, what is an intimacy coordinator? What do they do? And this is how we started. So here's Carly's on.
On set, intimacy coordinators are sort of a mix between a choreographer and an advocate for the actors and their safety, and also like a liaison between the actors and the rest of the creative team, whether it's costumes or the director or whatever, DP, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page and everybody's clear about what's happening and what's not going to be happening. So it's basically like it's a sex scene choreographer, but it's less about rules and like restrictions and more about creating healthy boundaries and ensuring everyone's physical, emotional, psychological safety, because it's possible to violate all of those things on set. And I think what happened in your class was something similar, though it was physical. There's like an older philosophy of acting that revolves around intensity, authenticity, and having to like bare your soul. And like, that's fine, but it ends up with a lot of people who have crossed boundaries that maybe they didn't know that they have. And I'm really happy that it seems like things are changing more towards like, you don't have to roll around on the floor and cry for hours and hours every day in order to be an authentic actor and to do good work. Like, it's possible to have it be easy. It's possible to have it be safe and still truthful without having to go to this place of self-abuse.
Being taken advantage of. I was interviewing this a British actress. Her name's Jada Shah, and she said, she showed up to set. It's not in the script, and the director's like, "Oh, we're going to change it up. Just get on your knees and act like you're giving a blowjob." Do you know what I mean? She's like, "Whoa, wait, are you kidding me?
Mm-hmm.
We didn't talk about this. We didn't agree to that." And he's like, "Well, you're not going to give one." You know what I mean? And it's those kind of things that no one took predominantly the actress's safety and well-being into account.
Right, exactly. To ask someone to do that without any preparation or warning, it's not consent. They have not consented to do the thing that you're asking them to do. And then you're coercing them by asking them to do it in the moment without any time to think. And like, obviously, if you're on set and any sort of a budget is involved, there's the excuse of like, there's money being wasted the longer it takes to make this decision. So I think that their SAG is finally recognizing that this is necessary, creating protocols for safe sets with a T, and intimacy coordination, and like what a high exposure scene actually is. What does it mean when there's like highly sensitive things that are happening? Who's allowed to be on set? What are the processes around nudity and any sort of sexuality? And like, when does that start? How does it play out the day that the shoot is happening? There's so many things that like were not specified. They would say like, oh, it's a closed set today, but there was no like definition of what a closed set actually is. So they're just now creating those guidelines. I think the Me Too movement really accelerated the urgency in terms of these things being necessary.
Yeah, I mean, this is pervasive, and I mean, it's whether you're in school, in grad school, or you're in a regional theater production. I mean, so you went to Yale, you got your MFA from Yale, you're an actress, you're a professional actress. How do you find your way towards investing your time and energy into learning how to be an intimacy coordinator?
So it started in grad school. I went to Yale for my MFA, and there were a couple of things that happened while I was at Yale. I had a very negative experience with being sexually harassed. And then there were consequences to that experience that really affected like my entire class, because I don't think that it was sort of dealt with like it was a mechanical problem. And once the mechanical problem was fixed, then everything was fine and we were just supposed to move on. But like for me personally, and I think throughout the class as a whole, there were like some emotional ramifications that were not addressed, and were not addressed on the school's time. So for example, they just moved forward with teaching as opposed to giving our class a chance to digest what had happened. We were supposed to deal with that on our own time. None of us knew how to do that. So there were some very not thoughtful conversations that happened. So that happened.
When you say not thoughtful conversations, you're talking from the department side, from the theater?
No, I'm talking about the members of my class. We were forced to try to process it on our own, not in class, and not with anyone who could moderate that discussion. So
is that because they didn't think it was their job or their responsibility to help you guys through that, or help you personally through it?
I don't know. I think they thought it's best to just move on and pretend like nothing happened, because you guys are here to learn how to act, and what happens outside the classroom is none of our business, which I think is, I can see why they would say that. But if you are, I mean, in a program that is that intense and that all encompassing, it's like you can't ignore what's happening in these actors' lives. It is partly your responsibility to ensure their safety. And the experience that I had did not happen during a class. It happened during my private life. It was still on the school's watch. They did take responsibility for some of it, but yeah, just the aftercare didn't really happen. We had to figure a lot of that out on our own.
Did this happen early on in
Yeah.
training?
very first year, like first semester. So it was for me, it was really challenging because I think it really like put a wrinkle in our class's bonding process, and it was hard for me too because I felt outside of I did not feel included socially at a lot of the out of class activities, and also in class I think there was some tension too.
Was it kind of thing where people were taking sides and there was like these camps?
Yeah, I think there were people who were friends with both of us and who didn't know like who was right and wrong. I think some people thought that the actions that were taken or that I took were too extreme and that we could have just worked it out on our own because it did escalate to the administration. So yeah, it was a lot of that. It was a matter of my personal safety being violated, and I consider that grounds to go to the authorities. So it's hard when you hear like all of these things about survivors of sexual harassment and assault. Like it's so hard to determine who's, like, is it my fault? Is it their fault? I know there's like a cancel culture thing that's happening a lot. And I do think that for particular cases, it is appropriate, like, for example, Harvey Weinstein, to put that person in jail because he's a repeat offender. But I don't think it's black and white. It's not like all of these people are bad and the women are totally blameless. Like, I think everyone has a responsibility partly for what happened, but I do think that there are situations that require escalation and require professionals to take care of the consequences. And in my case, I did escalate to a faculty level, and that I think caused a lot of confusion within the class.
Did you ever find yourself doubting your experience? Like, oh wait a minute, am I
Oh
overreacting? I
yeah.
mean, like this
Oh yeah,
is
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
maybe I'm the problem, and like all these
absolutely.
things. Yeah.
Yeah. I did a lot of things because I thought some of it, I remember apologizing for it happening. I remember trying to find the things within me that I felt like I needed to rectify or get rid of because the person with whom this happened, we had been involved romantically, but I felt like, well, how could I have let that happen to me? I have to do everything that I can possibly do to make sure that doesn't happen again, and also to not sabotage my time at this school, which is like a very big deal.
Yeah.
So I was determined to get through the program. Of course, there were times, and it's been like almost 10 years now, but for years, I mean, it still happens sometimes that I question the way it was handled and how I handled it and how everyone handled it. And obviously with Me Too happening, there was a lot of support that came out for victims of assault and rape victims and women and men who have experienced these things, and non-binary people. That's one of the sad, hard things about being sexually harassed or assaulted is that it can feel like, oh, it was my fault for wearing XYZ, for being in this location, for having this many drinks, for leading that person on. And I think the actions that the perpetrator takes are the perpetrator's choices. And therefore, I don't think that those who are victims are at fault. But I don't think that the environment that I was in clearly expressed what consent means and what constitutes sexual harassment and assault and what is allowed as a part of this program and what is not. I mean, we had a week of orientation with workshops. We had an hour-long presentation on how to be an usher at the Yale Rep.
Yeah, that's really helpful. That's helpful.
But we did not have any sort of beyond, I think, like passing acknowledgement of what sexual harassment and assault is and whether or not that will be tolerated. So I don't think everyone was on the same page. And I think it would have been simpler if we had had that training. For example, the types of things that I did at Maggie Flanagan, if students are given that training, then they know they are clearer on what the code of conduct is, so that if it's violated, it's much more understandable why that person can be asked to leave. You have to set out the boundaries at the start. Then if someone violates them, it's much clearer that that is a violation of the boundaries, because the institution has expressed, or the set has expressed, or the production team has expressed, these are the things that are and are not acceptable. And then when those things are violated, the person can be put on probation, or the person can be asked to leave. I think that what makes it more confusing is that in a lot of cases, these codes of conduct did not exist. So people don't know. And I think there's also a lot of people in the entertainment industry who are perpetrators of bad behavior, who don't want to be called out and don't want to be fired, whatever the reason is. So I think that makes people very nervous. And that's why, but this is a very long answer to the question of how I got to intimacy coordinating. It was based on this experience that I had early on during grad school, and seeing how confused we all were about what consent was, and what constitutes sexual harassment and assault. And then also seeing a lot of encouragement to be impulsive, to use each other's bodies, to kiss each other, to do sexual things in improvs in class. And this is not just at Yale, I think in general, in acting.
I think it's in every fucking acting.
Yeah, and like
class.
that's kind of like the appeal sometimes of acting, is that you get to like mess around with people who you're not actually dating or actually involved with. Then also having some positive experiences during grad school with professors who were there when rape scenes or any sort of intimate or nude scene happened, to take care of that process and to make sure that not only did we feel safe with our scene partners and with the director and the other people involved, but that also we had a boundary process around separating from the character. Because my body is if I'm being raped on stage, my body is going through that. And my body does not know the difference. My body doesn't know that it's not real. So ways to tell your body, this is not real. This person is not trying to hurt me. We're here to take care of each other. I do this 8 times a week, and then I leave it here, which is why I don't really support the method, which is like the idea that you have to be in character at all times, and that in order to fully understand a character, you have to try to replicate what their life is as much as possible in order to understand it. I think that people's imaginations are enough, and that you don't have to have this like all-consuming relationship with a character. I do think that characters can be very seductive, and like certain like Tennessee Williams, for example, like his plays are like, it's like opium or something. Like when you're in those plays, it just creates such an atmosphere that it's hard to tell what the boundaries are between life and the play. And so you have to have these boundaries for yourself and be conscious of that. I did a production of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof during grad school, not at Yale, but during one of the summer programs. And I had some really confusing experiences between life and the play. And one of the professors who was there was like, did nobody tell you that about Tennessee Williams? And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, his plays are like drugs. Like you have to like be very careful to not overdose on those feelings. So I had these professors who were teaching me the boundaries between character and self in a really nurturing way. And we also had a stage combat class. And the main principle of the stage combat class was we're taking care of each other. We're taking care of our partners. We're doing a fight scene, but we're taking care of our partners. It's like a dance. It's more about ensuring your partner's safety than it is about fighting. And so I think all of that was in my mind during grad school. Then I left, I graduated, and I came back and heard that Yale had conducted a survey of all of the professional schools on campus. And someone at the school told me that Yale had a really high percentage of reports of sexual harassment within the drama school, higher than other professional schools on campus. And I was like, well, of course. I mean, we're all like extremely expressive and emotional people who are underslept and overworked. We're being encouraged to explore these things with our partners. And then the boundaries aren't clear. And so these boundaries are being crossed a lot and often in rehearsal. And so I thought, why is there a process for stage combat and not for staged intimacy? Why do we have fight calls but not intimacy calls? Why do we have such a process in place for choreographing violence but not sexual violence and not sex scenes? Now, I wasn't the only person who was thinking about this. There are people who I studied with it's called IDC.
Yeah, Intimacy Directors International.
It used to be international. Now it's IDC, which I think is Intimacy Directors and Choreographers. I don't know. I think it's IDC. If you search intimacy direction, you should be able to find it. But the company that I trained with, the founders of that were doing this work as far back as 2006. A woman named Tonya Sina wrote her master's thesis about this. So the idea was in the air. I didn't come up with this concept, but I do think that Me Too really highlighted a lot of the need for this kind of structure. And it's not meant to censor. It's not meant to make things like a monk. What is it? Celibate. It's not like meant to like neuter everything in entertainment, but it is meant to bring more awareness to why these things exist in stories. Why do you have that sex scene here? Is it just to be titillating? That's fine if it is, but the actors need to know that. You just want a lot of boobs? That's fine. But the actors have to know that, they will be in the background with top nudity. Just more consciousness. I think about Game of Thrones a lot because if you watch that show, Game of Thrones had a lot of just like naked women, especially in the first few seasons.
And a lot of serious abuse. I mean, with Sophie Turner's character.
Oh, yeah.
Who was like, just brutally raped and sodomized.
Yeah, I don't know if they had an intimacy coordinator in those earlier seasons, but you can see as they progress over time, the use of sexuality and nudity becomes much more selective and much more intentional, I think.
I think HBO has also been very forward.
Yeah. HBO hired Alicia Rodas, who I have trained with, to be their sort of resident intimacy choreographer. And so I believe she consults with HBO what's happening on their sets. And then she also helps assign certain intimacy coordinators to certain projects. But there are also other little pods of women who are training people, women and non-binary folks, not so much men. And there's also like a huge push for having more diversity.
Who would want a man as an intimacy coach? It just doesn't seem like something.
I mean, I think a lot of fight directors and stunt coordinators have had to take on that role sometimes. Yeah, which is why it's so important to have trained people doing this, people who are trained in mental health, mediation, and consent, and anti-racism, who create a space for people where people can feel heard and where people can feel safe. And there's also a huge push towards more diversity in terms of intimacy coordinators because we are mostly white women. We need more people of color. We need more Indigenous people. We need more people of various sexuality or various sexual identities. So I know that awareness is happening because I think, like, for example, I know I'm friends with the woman who, or actually I don't know what her pronouns are, but I'm friends with the person who worked on Insecure on HBO. And like, I think that the intimacy coordinator on that show should be a Black person or a Black woman or a Black person, but she wasn't. It was better that they had someone on set doing that work. We are aware that we need more diversity.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to go back to something you said. You were doing Cat on a Hot Tin Roof.
Yes.
And you said you had some confusing experiences that blurred the line between what was real and what was, imaginary. What did you mean by confusing experiences? Because it might help other actors that might find themselves in that kind of a situation. Like, what did you mean by that?
If you're familiar with the play is about sex. Go ahead and give it a read. It's really amazing. So I was playing Maggie in this production, which is the lead female role. We were doing it as part of a summer festival, which was on these closed grounds. So like people come, it's in upstate New York, people come and stay on these grounds and they go to lectures and there are concerts and there are dance performances and there's like a company of performers who live there as well and are there to perform for the people who live in this community and also for people who come in order to see the artistic things that this festival is offering. The play centers around mostly these two characters, Maggie and her husband, Brick. Maggie basically talks for the entire first act of the play. There's a lot of work that Maggie and Brick have to do together. And so obviously I was working very closely with the person who was playing Brick. It was confusing because we would work on the play and then we would jump in the lake and then we would go bike riding and then we would make dinner together and then we would, and we're drinking together and and then we would go rehearse more. And then I would go to bed and think, wait, I'm not with this person. This person is with someone else.
But it feels like, oh my God, where I'm in this relationship. So the lines get blurred.
Yeah. Yeah. And it wasn't like we were trying to not make them blur. There was something really intoxicating about it. And eventually, I think it was clear, okay, we are not together. We're not a couple. We're not trying to be a couple. But there definitely was, I had to deal with my own sort of fixation on the person because I was playing this role. And I had to really get honest with myself and say, this is not real. Even though it feels real, this marriage or this relationship is not real. And I think ultimately that was helpful.
That takes maturity. That takes some real insight to be able to step back and go, whoa, time the fuck out here.
Right.
This is, I'm mixing some shit together.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that part of the reason I had that maturity was because it was a couple of years after what happened at school. And I was very, very trying to be very careful about getting involved with people I was acting with.
Right. Because it's such an incestuous business. Understandable. You're intimate. You're opening your heart.
A lot of the time, these people are extremely attractive and very talented and very charismatic and add that to pretending that you're married to this person or in Fool for Love, one of Sam Shepard's plays, or trying to think of other Miss Julie, Strindberg, Ibsen, Chekhov. There's a lot of very just highly charged moments. And yeah, the boundaries can get blurred really easily. I'm proud of my experience in that play because I think my work was really good. And I think we worked really well together as a cast. I wouldn't have changed anything. I wouldn't have changed the people I was doing it with either. I think it was a really wonderful show. And it was it still is a career highlight for me. I think had we gotten involved off stage, I would probably have a lot more mixed feelings about it. But as is, I did and still have really clear boundaries about not getting involved with people I'm working with. And at the time I was single and now I'm not. And so I think the more boundary, I don't know, that was just the line for me was I'm not going to get involved with the people I'm working with. I was really happy with myself that I had set that rule for myself of not being involved with the people that I work with so that it can be about the play and not about my personal feelings for the person that I'm working with.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious about how an actress, and when I say actress because I think women are the ones that are most at risk. There's a difference between approaching a piece of theater, right, where you're at a table, you make table read, and you're rehearsing, and you've got 3 or 4 weeks of working shit out. And the big difference between that and booking film and television, showing up on set
Hmm.
and having stuff thrown to you there in the moment.
Yeah.
And there's 50 people all around, and the director is saying that we need to do this and get this, and it seems far more precarious
Hmm.
in film and
Yeah.
television. How should an actor who's coming on set and knows there's maybe some intimacy or there's something, sexual, and
Hmm.
there's no intimacy coordinator on set, like what should they do?
I think the first thing is to say to anyone who's in that situation that they have rights. They have the right to say no. They have the right to leave. No one, like, they have the right to object to things that may be happening. And yes, it can be far scarier on a film set when there are power dynamics and when there are celebrities and, you name it, any number of situations that
And
can
you're
make
worried
it
about getting
harder.
fired. Like, I'm going to get fired if I
Yeah.
try to step up and say something here. I'm the problem.
Yeah.
And
Exactly. Especially if you're a woman or a person of color, it's very easy to be labeled as difficult. But I do think there are things that an actor can do to ensure, at least personally, that they have some boundaries. So even if there's no intimacy coordinator there, you can still take a second in the moments before you are shooting to say to the person you're working with, "Hi, I'm so and so. This is about to happen. That's super weird. But just so you know, like, this is what I'm okay with and this is what I'm not okay with. And otherwise, I think let's just try to enjoy
you're
it."
like, you
And
can touch me here. You can't touch me here. Don't put your fucking tongue in my mouth.
yeah, yeah. Or just like, it's let's connect on this and see what and also, like, it's not like kissing with tongue is bad or shouldn't happen. It's just like, is that needed to tell the story that you want to tell? So I think actors can take those little moments for themselves. Also, if there is any interaction with the director, talking about that. And I think the key is just earlier and earlier deciding what the scene is going to look like. So as opposed to improvising the day you get to set, before then you have had discussions with the casting director, with the intimacy coordinator. If there's no intimacy coordinator, with the costume people, with everyone who's going to be on set about why this scene is happening. And it's really hard if it's not an environment where this type of thing is practiced. I'm sure that it can be really hard. And I personally, I mean, I've never been in a situation like that on set. I could see myself not taking a job that seemed like it didn't have their shit together in terms of this. Which, by the way, for actors who are listening, like, nudity and sex should be, if that's going to be required of you, that should be expressed before the audition. So you should be able to know, you should have to know these things before you even get the part. It should be your choice whether or not you audition for something that involves nudity or sex. If there's any sexual act that's going to be asked or simulated sex, that should be expressly articulated in the breakdown. Anything beyond that, if I were cast in something and then found out later that I was going to have to do an intimate scene, I would probably quit. And I have the privilege to be able to do that. Trust your gut. If it seems like certain productions are playing around with this stuff in a way that's not fully articulated, then you have a right to leave that situation. So hopefully this happens less and less, where people end up on set and something like this is thrown at them.
And if you do show up to set and there is an intimacy coordinator, they are kind of like the buffer between the actor, between the director, between the producers, between the studio or the network. So if you
Mm-hmm.
do have concerns, I'm going to go to the intimacy coordinator. I'm going to say, listen, this is not
Exactly.
right.
Exactly. Because like, it's hard to go to somebody who's not there for that reason. It's hard to go to, like, the first AD or something, like the stage manager. It's hard it is partly those people's responsibility to uphold the safety of the set, but when there's an intimacy coordinator there, actors can come specifically to the intimacy coordinator and say, hey, this isn't working for me, whether it's a wardrobe thing or it's the way that the scene is being staged, or if a particular actor has a boundary that they don't want the other actor knowing about, but maybe they can tell the intimacy coordinator, like, I have trauma. You don't even have to explain why you have a certain boundary, but if you have a certain trauma with, having your arm grabbed or something, or being touched in a certain way, the intimacy coordinator can receive that information and then make sure that nothing happens that would violate that boundary without even having to say, we're not going to do X, Y, or Z. So it's like I can be the keeper of the personal information on behalf of the actors so that they can focus on doing the scene as opposed to not feeling safe. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Now, can you talk about this whole idea of consent and that it can change? Like, you might consent to something as an actor, and then you can pull that back at some point, at any time, actually, and that's okay. That's within your right.
Consent is reversible, meaning that it can be reversed at any time. So maybe at some point, an actor is okay with doing a certain scene, and then they get into the process of the scene and it actually isn't working for them. An actor has a right to say no to what's happening, and it doesn't mean that nothing else can happen. It doesn't mean there's no other solution and that person has to leave. It means let's work out something else that can still tell the story that we want to tell, but but feels safer for everyone involved.
Yeah, because an actor might say, "Oh, but I agreed to this, so I even though I don't do this anymore, I can't say anything because I already agreed to it."
Right. No, consent is reversible at all times. So even if it's in the middle of the scene being shot, an actor is allowed to say, "Stop, please." We're actually dealing with this in my. I take an acting class online. I live in LA, so were it in person, it would be in LA. But we have Meisner exercises that we do at the beginning of class, and sometimes those exercises veer into "I'm attracted to you" or like you're beautiful, whatever. And someone in the class was saying offline that they were uncomfortable with where this particular exercise went, and our teacher had to remind us, like, you are allowed to say no to this exercise and stop if something is happening and making you uncomfortable. No explanation needed. That said, it's harder to do it on a set where the stakes are much, much higher. But yes, you are allowed to say no should you feel uncomfortable with something that's happening.
And also in the audition, I mean, like SAG has laid out some pretty clear rules, right? I mean, like there's no nudity at all that's required for an audition.
You should never be asked to take
even a self-tape.
Right. You should never be asked to take off your clothes in an audition. I think it's pretty black and white at this point. It's
pretty black and white. And also, this is interesting. No simulated sex in an audition.
Right. Yes.
Now, this is, I had an actress, former student, her name's Candace Maxwell, and she booked a recurring role in the last season of Power, the Stars show. It was her first professional job, and the audition, this was only like 3 years ago. She read the sides on the podcast. She was in bed having sex. She was having sex the guy was fucking her from behind. And these are the sides. And so they're having this conversation while they're having sex. And that was the audition side.
That was her audition scene.
That was the audition scene. And now this was a self-tape.
Oh, God.
So, she's acting this out. And that's fucked up. You can't do that now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, it's like, so the director is going to watch 150 women simulating sex, and 149 of those women are not even going to get the job. That is bullshit.
And she booked the job, which is
good for her. Still, good for her.
It freaked her out. It freaked her out at first. Right. Uncomfortable. So even something like that, if you get a piece of material, you get slides for an audition, you can say, wait a minute, and appropriate.
Yeah. And you have to really ask yourself and have that relationship with your representation where you can say, like, I'm not okay with this and I'm going to pass on it. That is totally okay. And also, though, even though this may seem obvious, no actual sex should ever be happening
Right.
on set.
Right.
Because that would make you a porn star.
Yeah. I mean, they call them modesty garments, right? Like there's got to be something that protects.
Oh, yes.
you.
Yeah. There are barriers, and then intimacy coordinators can simulate reality. Just like in a fight scene, violence is simulated, but it isn't real.
I look at some of the shows, I May Destroy You. The sex on that show, not only was it just some of the most vulnerable and vivid, and unsettling for so many reasons, just because you're just not used to seeing that. I just, this as an actor, you're watching, going, my God, what it took for those guys.
Yeah.
Through that is unbelievable. In between that and even something like Normal People, which is like on the other end, the other spectrum, where it's so tender and it's so much love and there's so much openness. That's difficult too, really hard.
Yeah, but both of those shows had intimacy coordinators on them, and I'm so glad. I mean, had those actors been going through that, and especially with Michaela Cole having actually lived that experience, it'd be very important to be very careful with the boundaries of what is real and what is not. And if you notice the recurring, well, I'm not going to spoil anything, but if you haven't watched I May Destroy You, watch I May Destroy You.
It's great.
It was, I mean, it's really.
I think it's one of the best shows I've seen probably in the last 10 years. And just in terms of the boundaries it crossed, what it addressed, the way that she told the story, that was just exceptional.
Agree. So we'll just let the Hollywood Foreign Press know about that the next time.
Utter bullshit. Unbelievable snub.
It was not nominated for any Golden Globes, which, I mean, not surprising, but infuriating.
Yeah.
But anyway, they had an intimacy coordinator on that show, and had they not, I would have been very worried about the well-being of the people involved. I think it's beautiful to be able to watch a production where there is an intimacy coordinator, and therefore the story becomes even more potent and more deliberate and more intentional and more real, more vulnerable, because it's being done safely. There's nothing that you can't do aside from literal sex when you're on set. Anything is possible
as long as the boundaries are set and you're clear about
exactly. You can make it seem like anything is happening, and if you have good actors, you should be able to simulate those experiences. But like when you're stabbing someone with a sword, you're not actually killing them, unless there's a terrible accident, in which case that's awful. But yeah, I think I May Destroy You is a really great example. Another example of a play that was very, very explicit sexually, but also used an intimacy coordinator is Slave Play. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I mean that's.
Did you see it?
Yeah, it was incredible.
Yeah.
The scene where they're in bed and she's using a dildo and on him.
Yeah, I mean it's like some of the most explicit sex I've ever seen on stage.
Too.
And yet there was an intimacy coordinator. And so it was I felt so much trust in that production to be doing it the right way, where their actors are taken care of. And I happen to know, I mean, a lot of those people went to Yale, so I happen to know a lot of them. And I know that even though they were doing these extremely traumatic things on stage, that they couldn't have been taking care of each other more lovingly, more consistently, in a more consensual way. Just to know that everybody was on the same page made it easier to watch, even though it was difficult to watch.
Have you ever found yourself as a coordinator and getting like pushback from the production side? Like, listen, you're fucking up my film, you're fucking up my play.
Nothing that explicit. And it's interesting because a lot of the stuff, when this was like in 2017, or 2018, when we first met, and when this stuff was happening a lot of the reason why intimacy coordinators and directors would be summoned is because something goes wrong. And then we had to play cleanup. So there was a lot of oops, we didn't have an intimacy coordinator and now everyone's fucked up and like angry. So can you come and fix everything? There was like a phase where there was a lot of that. And then it sort of turned into, oh, let's have an intimacy coordinator at the start. And then it turned into having to work with people who didn't necessarily want intimacy coordination, whether it's actors or other people on the production team. I've never had someone be like, fuck you, I can't believe you're here. But I have, like, for example, I was called on to set for one show and there was an intimate scene that was being filmed. They started filming the scene without calling me to the set because they didn't realize that that's what they were supposed to do. Fine, but I'm supposed to be there in order to ensure the safety of everyone involved. And yeah, there's a learning curve, but I don't know if I believe that they just forgot. I mean, and maybe that's on me for like not paying attention to what exactly was being shot at all moments. But they called me at 6 a.m. for a scene that was shot at 2:30 p.m. and they forgot to call me to set. So there's that. And then there are the people who are like, oh, I'm so glad you're here. But there, you know, where there's resistance, there's also a lot of gratitude on, you know, people saying, like, there was one scene that I was on set while they were shooting. It was the actors and me and like the rest of the crew that needed to be there because it was a closed set, and all of the crew members were men. And one of the sound guys afterwards pulled me aside and was like, I'm so happy you were there, because it's so hard as like a person on the crew to film these things in a room full of men, you know, with nobody else there. And so even though I wasn't explicitly doing something, just the fact that I was standing in the room changed the environment.
Yeah, well, so if there's somebody out there who's listening who's interested in getting involved, like how would they even go about looking into this as a possible career path?
You can go to idcprofessionals.com. My friend Mia Schachter does a lot of seminar. Do you know Mia?
Mm-mm,
You're nodding.
no.
Okay. She's based in LA and she does a lot of seminars about consent, unrelated to acting, but also related to intimacy coordinating. You can find her on Instagram, Alicia Rodas on Instagram, Claire Warden on Instagram. Alicia is the woman who HBO hired, and Claire is the first intimacy director to work on Broadway. So all of these people have a lot of things that they post and ways to start training, I believe. So that's happily like available now. But now there are like training modules for people who are interested to get involved. Especially if you're a person of color, please train.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. There's space for you for sure. Why do you love acting? What do you love about it? Why do you keep grinding out this life?
I think were this 5 years ago, or when I was just out of grad school, I could have said like, I live and breathe acting and it's like the only thing that I can do. Like when people say, if you can do something else, you should do it. Like I was always so insulted by that because it was like, what, it has to be like the last possible resort. There are plenty of other things that I can do, but I choose to do acting because I love acting. Now I'm a bit more of a cynic, and I think I choose to do acting because it's fun and I'm good at it and I like being in the community of artists and actors. But I'm not actively auditioning at this point. I don't know if I will. I'm sort of looking for representation, but not. It's not all that I'm doing. I have a day job, and it doesn't feel like I'm dying because I'm not acting, which is good. I actually really love my life right now.
So what's the importance of hobbies and other passions? You know, like what's that done for you?
Well, first of all, it's made acting not life and death, meaning there are other things in my life. Like I thought that the only way for me to be happy was to have success as an actor, or a very narrow definition of success as an actor, which the more I tried to have that success, the less happy I became. And for various reasons over the last 4 or 5 years, I've had to really reorient and reprioritize. now there's a lot of, I think I act and did act for a sense of connection to other people and a sense of imagination and play. And there are so many ways in life that you can have that sense of imagination and play, and that serves you as an actor without actually having to act every moment of every day. Live your life, live a life. That will be the best way to learn how to act is by living your life in a full way, in a present way, with people that you love. And then the acting becomes not life or death. It becomes a pleasure. It becomes more fun to watch because I'm not watching an actor have an actual nervous breakdown. I'm watching them use their imagination to tell a story that's really compelling.
Well, my fellow daydreamers, thank you for sticking around and keeping that phone in your pocket. My New York City Conservatory, the Maggie Flanagan Studio, is celebrating its 20th summer. June 14th, we start our 6-week Summer Meisner Intensive. If you want to study with me, please go to themaggieflanaganstudio.com for more details. For every episode, the contents, the links to all of these shows, to book me for private coaching, read my blog, sign up for the newsletter, go to creatingbehaviorpodcast.com. You can follow me on Instagram at creatingbehavior, at Maggie Flanagan Studio. Lawrence Trailer, thank you for the music, my man. My friends, make sure you set boundaries and speak up for yourself. Live a full life. Play full out with yourself. And don't ever settle for your second best. My name is Charlie Sandlan. Peace.